before he became a hero, before he stood alone on a battlefield in Okinawa, before bullets tore through the air around him. Desmond Thomas Doss was just a boy. He was born on February 7th, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia, a small American town still recovering from the shadows of World War I. His father, William Doss, had fought in that war. He came home alive, but something inside him did not. Like many veterans of the Great War, he returned carrying wounds no one could see. He struggled with anger, with trauma, with alcohol. The violence he had witnessed overseas followed him back into his home. Young Desmond grew up watching this. He saw what war could do to a man long before he ever stepped onto a battlefield himself. And then there was his mother. Bertha Doss was devout, deeply religious, grounded in her faith. She raised her son within the teachings of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a denomination that emphasized peace, compassion, Sabbath observance, and strict adherence to the Ten Commandments. One commandment shaped Desmond more than any other: "Thou shalt not kill." For many, it was a rule open to interpretation. Context mattered. War changed things. Survival changed things. But to Desmond, it was absolute, not symbolic, not flexible. Absolute. There was a painting in his childhood home depicting the Ten Commandments. In one corner of the artwork, Cain stood over Abel, violence frozen in color. As a child, Desmond would stare at that image for long moments. He once said it disturbed him deeply. The idea of taking another life felt fundamentally wrong to him, not because he was weak, not because he was afraid, but because he believed every human life was sacred, even in war. As he grew older, the world outside Lynchburg grew darker. The Great Depression tightened its grip across America. Poverty spread. Jobs vanished. Families struggled. Desmond worked in a shipyard during his teenage years, helping support himself and his family. And across the ocean, something even more ominous was unfolding. Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. Militarism spread across Europe and Asia. Nations armed themselves. Borders trembled. In 1939, the world exploded into war. At first, America stayed out of it. But on December 7, 1941, everything changed. Japanese aircraft roared across the sky over Pearl Harbor. Bombs fell. Battleships burned. More than 2,400 Americans died in a single morning. The United States declared war the next day. Young men lined up to enlist. Factories shifted to wartime production. Posters filled the streets. The country mobilized. Desmond Doss made a decision. He would serve. He believed in defending his country. He believed in helping others. He believed in standing against tyranny. But he would not compromise his faith. He would not carry a weapon. He would not take a life. To many, that sounded contradictory. How do you go to war without intending to fight? How do you join the army without agreeing to shoot? But Desmond did not see service and killing as the same thing. He wanted to be a medic. He wanted to save lives. If men were going to bleed on foreign soil, he wanted to be there to stop the bleeding. His decision was not impulsive. It was not emotional. It was rooted in years of conviction, years of prayer, years of wrestling with what obedience to God truly meant. When he told his family he was enlisting, his mother feared for his life. She even asked him not to go. He answered calmly, "If I don't go, someone else will have to." But he added something else. "I will not carry a gun." That was the promise, not just to his mother, but to himself. He was about to enter a world that would test that promise in ways he could not imagine. The question was no longer whether he would go to war. The question was whether his convictions could survive it. When Desmond Doss arrived at Fort Jackson for basic training, the trouble began almost immediately. The U.S. Army had processed him as a conscientious objector, someone who opposed killing based on religious belief. But the military machine was not designed for nuance. It was built for obedience, uniformity, compliance, and Doss stood out from the start. He refused to touch a rifle. During weapons training, he would stand aside while others practiced shooting. When ordered to hold a firearm, he quietly declined, not angrily, not rebelliously. Quietly, his fellow soldiers did not understand. They were preparing to enter the most violent war in history. They would soon be facing machine guns, artillery, flamethrowers, and the man sleeping beside them refused to carry a weapon. To them, that wasn't conviction. It was cowardice. They called him names. Coward. Conscientious coward. They mocked his prayers. They threw boots at him while he lay in his bunk at night. One night, someone even beat him so severely that he required medical attention. He never reported it. He never retaliated. He never raised his voice. Instead, he prayed. His commanding officers were equally frustrated. A soldier who refused to carry a rifle threatened morale. What if others followed his example? What if his refusal undermined discipline? They tried to force him to quit. They assigned him extra duties. They humiliated him publicly. They pressured him relentlessly. One officer attempted to have him discharged on psychiatric grounds, claiming he was mentally unstable. Another tried to court-martial him for refusing orders. But Doss knew military regulations. He had studied them carefully before enlisting. As a conscientious objector assigned to medical duty, he was not required to bear arms. His refusal was legal. It was protected, even if it was unpopular. There were moments when the pressure must have felt unbearable. Imagine being isolated from your unit, mocked daily, threatened by superiors, physically assaulted, and still holding your ground, not with aggression, not with defiance, but with calm, immovable conviction. At one point, his commanding officer gave him an ultimatum: either carry a rifle or leave. Doss answered simply, "Sir, I am here to save lives." That answer did not change their minds, but it did reveal something important. He was not avoiding danger. He was running toward it, just in a different way. Eventually, after legal reviews and appeals, higher command ruled in his favor. He would remain in the Army as a medic, unarmed. But even then, acceptance did not come easily. His fellow soldiers still distrusted him. They believed he would freeze in combat. They believed he would abandon them when bullets started flying. They believed that when fear took over, faith would collapse. They had no idea what was coming. Because basic training is one thing, war is another. In training, bullets are theoretical. In war, they are real. In training, screams are simulated. In war, they echo in your memory forever. Soon, Doss and his unit, the 77th Infantry Division, were deployed to the Pacific Theater. They saw action in Guam, in Leyte, brutal island battles where jungle heat mixed with gunfire and blood. And slowly, something began to change. Under fire, Doss did not hide. He did not hesitate. While others shot, he ran toward the wounded, through explosions, through sniper fire, through chaos. He treated injuries under pressure. He carried men to safety. He risked his life repeatedly. The same soldiers who had once mocked him began to reconsider. Because when bullets start flying, you discover who people really are. And Doss was not afraid. He was steady, focused, calm in a way that seemed almost impossible. But the true test was still ahead. A place unlike anything they had seen before. A place where death would rain from above. Where the earth itself seemed to explode. A place called Okinawa. And at its heart, a cliff. Soon, the soldier who refused to carry a weapon would face the ultimate trial of his conviction. And history would never forget what happened next. If Europe was a war strategy, the Pacific was a war of annihilation. There were no wide open plains, no gradual advances, no measured retreats. The Pacific Theater was raw, brutal, personal, island after island. American forces fought against an enemy that believed surrender was dishonor. The Japanese Imperial Army had been shaped by a warrior code, Bushido, where death was often preferable to capture. This changed everything. In Europe, soldiers surrendered by the thousands. In the Pacific, they fought to the last man, or they charged in suicidal attacks, or they detonated grenades against their own bodies rather than be taken alive. For American soldiers, the psychological toll was enormous. There was no predictability. No safety even after victory seemed secured. A cave that looked empty could erupt with gunfire. A wounded enemy soldier could pull a hidden grenade. Every shadow could kill you. And then there was the terrain. Jungle so thick sunlight barely touched the ground. humidity that suffocated the lungs, mud that swallowed boots. The air itself felt hostile. By 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its end. Germany was collapsing, but in the Pacific, the fighting only grew more desperate because the next objective was not just another island. It was Okinawa, and Okinawa was different. Okinawa was Japanese soil. It was the last major barrier before a possible invasion of mainland Japan. If Okinawa fell, American bombers could strike Japan more easily. If Okinawa fell, the war would enter its final phase, and both sides knew it. On April 1st, 1945, more than 180,000 American troops landed on the beaches of Okinawa. It would become the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater. At first, resistance seemed light, too light. American forces advanced inland cautiously, and then they encountered the defensive line. The Japanese had not chosen to defend the beaches. They had fortified the high ground, hidden bunkers, reinforced tunnels, artillery concealed inside limestone ridges, machine gun nests carved into cliffs. And at the center of this defensive network stood a massive escarpment, nearly 400 feet high, the Maeda Escarpment. But the soldiers gave it another name, Hacksaw Ridge. It was not just a cliff, it was a fortress. The only way up was by cargo net, climbing slowly, exposed, vulnerable, and at the top waited overlapping fields of fire, mortars, snipers, machine guns positioned with deadly precision. Every inch of that ridge had been prepared. The Japanese understood something crucial. If they could hold the high ground, they could bleed the American army dry. The fighting that followed was savage. Rain turned the battlefield into mud. Bodies lay where they fell. Explosions shattered the earth. Men screamed for medics over the thunder of artillery. And somewhere in that chaos, among riflemen gripping their weapons tightly, among soldiers bracing for the next wave of fire, there was one man carrying no rifle at all. Private First Class Desmond Doss, unarmed, climbing toward Hacksaw Ridge, toward the place that would define him forever. Because soon, the ridge would erupt, and the soldier who refused to kill would face a decision that no training could prepare him for, and history would watch. Dawn broke over Okinawa with an eerie stillness, the kind of silence that does not bring peace. But warning, below the Maeda Escarpment, American soldiers gathered at the base of the cliff. For 100 feet of rock towered above them, jagged, imposing, unforgiving. Cargo nets were thrown over the edge. There would be no gradual ascent, no tactical staircase, only a vertical climb into uncertainty. The order was given. Men began climbing, rifles slung over shoulders, packs heavy against their backs, boots searching for footing in rope and air. Desmond Doss climbed with them. No rifle, only a medic's bag. At the top, the first wave spread out cautiously. For a moment, nothing. Then the world exploded. Machine guns erupted from concealed positions. Mortars rained down. The ground shattered into flying debris. Men were cut down instantly. Some never even saw the enemy. The Japanese defenses had been built into the ridge itself. Bunkers reinforced with earth and steel, connected by tunnels that allowed soldiers to appear and disappear like ghosts. American troops tried to advance, but every step forward was answered with fire. The ridge became chaos. Smoke thickened the air. The smell of gunpowder mixed with blood. Cries for help pierced through the thunder of artillery. And then the order came. Retreat, one by one. Surviving soldiers scrambled back toward the cargo nets. They climbed down as bullets snapped past them. The wounded were left behind, not because anyone wanted to leave them, but because staying meant certain death. Soon, the top of Hacksaw Ridge felt eerily quiet again, except for one thing. The wounded, groaning, calling out, bleeding into the dirt, and somewhere among them, Desmond Doss was still moving. He had not retreated. He crawled toward the nearest injured soldier. Bullets cracked overhead. He pressed bandages against torn flesh, injected morphine, whispered reassurance. Then he dragged the man across the torn battlefield toward the edge of the cliff. Every step exposed him. Every movement could be his last. He reached the edge. No stretcher team waited. No covering fire. just a rope. He tied the soldier carefully, lowered him slowly down the cliff face, watched his hand below, caught him. One saved. He turned back. Gunfire echoed again. Japanese soldiers were still there, hidden, watching, hunting. Doss crawled again. Another wounded man, another bandage, another prayer. Lord, help me get one more. He lifted the next soldier, dragged him, lowered him. Again and again. Hours passed. The sun shifted across the sky. Smoke drifted over the ridge like a curtain of ash. Doss moved through it like a shadow, unarmed, exposed, relentless. At one point, Japanese soldiers came dangerously close. He hid behind a rock, heart pounding. He could hear their voices. He could hear boots scraping against stone. He had no weapon, no defense. If they found him, he would die. But they moved past, and he continued. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with silence, except for him. He kept working under fading light. Each time he reached the cliff's edge and lowered another man down, he whispered the same words. Just one more. Down below, soldiers began counting. 1, 5, 10, 20. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A lone medic on the ridge, lowering body after body, alive, when it was finally over. When darkness made movement impossible. When Doss himself climbed down the cargo net. 75 men had been saved. 75 men who would have bled out alone on that ridge. Men who had once mocked him. Men who had once called him coward. They looked at him differently now. Not with pity, not with doubt, but with awe. The soldier who refused to carry a gun had faced the same storm of steel they had. He had not fired a shot, but he had fought in his own way. And the battle for Hacksaw Ridge was not over. More assaults would come, more explosions, more blood, and soon Doss himself would be wounded. But even then, he would refuse to stop. The battle for Okinawa did not end with that first assault. Hacksaw Ridge would be attacked again, and again. Each time, the fighting grew more desperate. The Japanese defenders launched counterattacks at night. Sudden, violent waves of soldiers emerging from hidden tunnels, screaming, charging, firing in every direction. Sleep became a luxury. Fear became constant. And yet, when the next assault was ordered, something remarkable happened. The same soldiers who once mocked Desmond Doss refused to climb the ridge without him. They waited because they believed something now. If Doss was there, they had a better chance of coming back alive. Before the attack, Doss knelt to pray. Men stood around him silently. No one laughed. No one threw boots. When he finished, they climbed. The second major assault was even more brutal than the first. Artillery pounded the ridge. Flamethrowers roared against bunker openings. Machine guns tore through advancing lines. The ground shook with impact after impact. Doss moved as he always had, low, focused, scanning for the wounded. He treated burns. He wrapped shattered limbs. He dragged men to craters for temporary cover. Then it happened. A grenade landed near him. There was no time to throw it back. The explosion ripped through the air. Shrapnel tore into his legs. Pain surged instantly. Metal fragments embedded deep in muscle. For most soldiers, that would have meant evacuation. For Doss, it meant something else. He began treating himself. He packed his own wounds, wrapped his legs, stopped the bleeding. And then he kept working. He crawled now instead of running. Each movement sent waves of pain through his body, but the cries of the wounded were louder. He continued pulling men to safety, continued administering morphine, continued whispering reassurances. Eventually, his injuries made standing impossible. A stretcher team was called, for soldiers lifted him carefully. They began carrying him toward the edge of the ridge. Then Doss saw something. Another soldier, wounded worse than he was, bleeding heavily, barely conscious. Without hesitation, Doss made a decision. He rolled off the stretcher. refused evacuation, gave his place to the more critically injured man. He lay there, exposed again to gunfire, waiting. The stretcher team disappeared into smoke. Minutes passed, then more. Gunfire intensified. As he waited for another team to reach him, a sniper fired. The bullet struck his left arm. It shattered bone. The impact spun him sideways. For a moment, everything blurred. His arm hung useless, broken, bleeding. This time, there would be no stretcher nearby, no immediate rescue. So Desmond Doss did something almost unthinkable. Using the stock of a discarded rifle as a splint, he tied it to his shattered arm, bound it tightly, and began crawling 300 yards, through mud, through debris, under sniper fire. Each inch scraped against wounded legs. Each movement required pulling his body forward with one functioning arm. But he kept going, slowly, deliberately, determined. Eventually, he reached safety, his body broken, his uniform soaked in blood, his strength nearly gone, but his mission complete. He had not left until others were safe. The men who watched this unfold understood something profound. This was not stubbornness. It was not recklessness. It was conviction in motion. The soldier, who would not carry a weapon, had endured the same hell they had, and more. He had been wounded twice and still chosen others first. Word spread through the division. Stories traveled faster than official reports. A medic who stayed alone on a ridge. A medic who lowered 75 men by rope. A medic who crawled through sniper fire with a shattered arm. And something shifted permanently. He was no longer the conscientious objector. He was no longer the coward. He was their medic, their protector, their quiet guardian under fire. The Battle of Okinawa would continue for weeks. More than 12,000 Americans would die. Tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers would fall. Civilians would be caught in the devastation. It would become one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific. But among the destruction, one story rose above the smoke. Not of a sniper, not of a general, not of a tank commander, but a man who refused to kill and chose instead to save. And soon, the highest military honor in the United States would be placed around his neck, not for how many lives he took, but for how many he refused to abandon. The Battle of Okinawa finally ended in June of 1945. 82 days of relentless combat, mud, steel, fire, and loss on a scale few could comprehend. More than 12,000 Americans were killed, tens of thousands wounded. Japanese casualties were catastrophic. Civilians were caught in unimaginable devastation. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. And from that battlefield of destruction emerged one of the most unlikely heroes in American military history. Desmond Thomas Doss was evacuated to the United States to recover from his injuries. Shrapnel remained embedded in his body. His arm required months to heal. His legs would never be the same. But the greater transformation had already happened. The men who once doubted him now wrote statements on his behalf. Officers documented what they had witnessed. 75 lives saved in a single night, dozens more in the days that followed. Repeated exposure to enemy fire, refusal to abandon the wounded, twice wounded himself, still refusing evacuation until others were safe. The recommendations moved up the chain of command, through generals, through war departments, through review boards, and eventually the decision was made. On October 12, 1945, in a ceremony at the White House, President Harry S. Truman placed a Medal of Honor around Desmond Doss's neck. Truman reportedly told him, "I would rather have this medal than be president." It was not symbolic praise. It was recognition of something rare. Desmond Doss became the first conscientious objector in American history to receive the Medal of Honor. Let that sink in. A man who refused to carry a weapon received the highest award for valor in combat, because courage is not always loud. It is not always aggressive. It does not always carry a rifle. Sometimes courage crawls through mud with a broken arm. Sometimes courage whispers prayers under artillery fire. Sometimes courage chooses not to hate. Doss never saw himself as extraordinary. He would later say, I was just doing my job. But history disagreed, because his job required something most people struggle to sustain under pressure: conviction, uncompromising, unshaken, unarmed. After the war, Doss lived quietly. He married Dorothy Schutte. He worked. He struggled with health complications from tuberculosis, contracted in the Pacific. He lost part of a lung. He endured surgeries. He faced a long shadow that wore casts over survivors. But he never glorified what happened on that ridge. He never framed it as triumph over enemies. He framed it as service. Service to God. Service to country. Service to fellow soldiers. Years later, when asked how he survived that night on Hacksaw Ridge, he answered simply, "I prayed, not for victory, not for revenge, not for survival, but for one more. Lord, help me get one more." And that prayer has echoed through history, because in a war defined by destruction, he chose preservation. In a battlefield defined by killing, he chose healing. In a world collapsing under violence, he held on to mercy. We often measure greatness in numbers: battles won, territory captured, enemies defeated. But Desmond Doss forces us to ask a different question. What if greatness is measured in restraint? What if true strength is a refusal to surrender your principles, even when the world demands it? World War II produced generals whose names fill textbooks. It produced strategies that reshape continents. It produced weapons that change the future forever. But on a single cliff in Okinawa, it also produced a quiet medic who showed that heroism does not require a trigger. Desmond Doss died in 2006 at the age of 87, not as a myth, not as a symbol, but as a man who held on to what he believed. When everything around him tried to tear it away, the soldier who refused to kill saved 75 lives in one night. But perhaps his greater legacy is this: he proved that even in the darkest chapters of human history, light can choose not to extinguish itself. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to become what the war demands.